The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the streets as Special Agent Tasha Williams adjusted her seatbelt to accommodate her growing belly. At 6 months pregnant, even simple tasks like fastening a seatbelt had become exercises in patience. She glanced at the clock on her dashboard, 5:17 p.m. Rush hour traffic would be brutal, but she was eager to get home after a particularly draining day at the FBI field office. Tasha stretched her neck from side to side, feeling the tension from hours hunched over case files. The Hernandez trafficking case was nearly ready for prosecution, and her meticulous work over the past 8 months was finally paying off. As lead investigator, she'd coordinated surveillance operations, conducted interviews with reluctant witnesses, and assembled a case that would likely put away some genuinely dangerous people for a very long time. Her phone buzzed with a text from her husband. "Dion, don't forget we need groceries for tomorrow. Love you both." Tasha smiled, placing a hand on her stomach where their daughter had been doing somersaults all afternoon. "Your dad's already planning meals for you," she murmured. "Just wait until you're actually eating solid foods." As she approached the main highway, Tasha groaned at the sea of red brake lights stretching into the distance. An accident, construction, or just the usual gridlock, it didn't matter. Her back was already aching, and the thought of sitting in stop-and-go traffic for an hour was unbearable. "Time for Plan B," she said, tapping her navigation app to find an alternate route. The app suggested cutting through Oak Ridge Heights, an affluent suburban neighborhood that would bypass most of the highway congestion. Tasha made the turn, immediately noticing the change in scenery. Manicured lawns stretched before large stately homes with luxury vehicles parked in circular driveways. Children's bicycles and basketball hoops signaled family-friendly streets, a sharp contrast to her own modest neighborhood where houses were packed more tightly together, and yards were practical rather than showcase pieces. She reduced her speed, carefully observing the posted 25 mph limit. The last thing she needed was to get a ticket in a neighborhood where she already felt like an outsider. Though she'd been an agent for 7 years and had worked in communities across the economic spectrum, Tasha still felt the weight of being observed in certain spaces. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "You represent more than just yourself when you go places. Remember that." It was advice given to her as a child, but it had followed her into adulthood. A constant reminder that she moved through the world carrying other people's expectations and assumptions. The baby kicked sharply and Tasha winced. "Easy there, little one," she said, gently rubbing the spot. "You've got a powerful kick. Maybe you'll play soccer someday." She'd been talking more to the baby lately, a habit that had started as self-conscious whispers and had evolved into full conversations. Her colleague Pat had caught her discussing casework with her bump last week, and hadn't stopped teasing her since. As she navigated the winding residential streets, Tasha mentally reviewed the plans for her maternity leave, now just 3 weeks away. Deputy Director Alvarez had already assigned her cases to other agents, though Tasha had insisted on finishing the Hernandez file personally. It was too important to hand off, and she wanted to ensure every detail was properly documented. Before she stepped away, "I'll still be reachable by phone," she'd told Alvarez that afternoon during their final pre-leave meeting. The older woman had fixed her with a stern look over her reading glasses. "Tasha, when I say leave, I mean leave. Those first months with your child are precious and pass quickly. The Bureau managed before you arrived, and will survive while you're gone." Tasha smiled at the memory. Alvarez had been both mentor and occasional mother figure since Tasha had joined the Bureau. Her advice came from experience. Alvarez had raised 3 children while climbing the ranks of the FBI, a path Tasha hoped to follow. The navigation app directed Tasha to turn onto Maple Lane, a tree-lined street with sprawling properties set back from the road. She slowed further, admiring the autumn colors beginning to emerge on the trees. Fall had always been her favorite season, and she looked forward to introducing her daughter to the simple joy of jumping into piles of leaves. A black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror, moving quickly despite the residential speed limit. Tasha moved slightly to the right, giving the vehicle room to pass if the driver was in a hurry. Instead of passing, the SUV maintained its position several car lengths behind her. Tasha frowned slightly but kept her speed steady. After another minute, the SUV was still there, maintaining the same distance. Her instincts, honed through years of training and fieldwork, prickled with awareness. The vehicle wasn't close enough to be threatening, but its constant presence felt intentional rather than coincidental. Just being cautious, she reassured herself. Recalling how pregnancy had heightened her already vigilant nature, the Hernandez case had also left her more alert to potential surveillance. Though she'd taken precautions to keep her identity protected during the investigation, there was always risk in her line of work. Tasha took the next turn, which wasn't on her route home but would confirm whether the SUV was following her or simply headed in the same direction. The black vehicle turned as well, maintaining its distance. Her heart rate increased slightly. This was probably nothing. Perhaps a resident who was suspicious of an unfamiliar car driving slowly through their neighborhood. It wouldn't be the first time Tasha had been watched with suspicion while doing nothing more than existing in a space where people didn't expect to see her. Still, she wouldn't ignore her training. Tasha reached for her phone, ready to call dispatch if necessary, when blue lights suddenly flashed behind her. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, immediately recognizing the unmarked SUV as police. The realization brought both relief and annoyance. At least it wasn't related to her casework. But being pulled over while simply trying to avoid traffic was frustrating. Tasha carefully pulled to the side of the road, positioning her car where it would be visible to any passing vehicles. She turned off the engine, then placed both hands on the steering wheel, standard procedure that had been drilled into her both as an FBI agent and as a black woman driving in America. As she waited for the officer to approach, Tasha mentally prepared her identification. Her FBI credentials were in her purse on the passenger seat, along with her driver's license. She would need to explain that she was armed, as her service weapon was secured in its holster at her hip. The officer was taking his time, likely running her plates. Tasha took a deep breath, reminding herself to remain professional. She'd been on both sides of law enforcement interactions and knew how quickly situations could escalate with misunderstandings. Through her side mirror, Tasha finally saw the officer emerge from the SUV. He moved with deliberate slowness, hand resting near his holster as he approached, a stance that seemed excessive for a routine traffic stop. She could now see he was a white man with a buzz cut, probably in his mid-30s, wearing sunglasses despite the fading daylight. Just a normal traffic stop, she whispered to herself and her unborn child. "We'll be home soon enough." The officer stopped just behind her driver's side window, positioning himself at an angle that suggested tactical training. His posture was unnecessarily tense, and Tasha felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, the same feeling she'd had during other traffic stops throughout her life, long before she had a badge of her own. As the officer tapped on her window, Tasha reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. She was simply taking a detour through a neighborhood to avoid traffic, something thousands of drivers did every day. What she couldn't know, as she prepared to roll down her window, was that this routine detour was about to become much more complicated. The next few minutes would test her training, her patience, and ultimately expose a pattern of behavior that would have consequences beyond this quiet suburban street. The officer's face was unreadable behind his sunglasses as Tasha lowered her window, unaware that her credentials, her pregnancy, and her profession were about to collide with his assumptions in a way that would change both their lives. Officer Mike Reynolds adjusted his sunglasses as he approached the sedan. He'd been patrolling Oak Ridge Heights for 3 years now, and he prided himself on knowing who belonged and who didn't. The unfamiliar car had caught his attention immediately, moving slowly, driver looking at houses. In his mind, that spelled trouble in a neighborhood where the average home price topped 7 figures. "License and registration," he said flatly, not bothering with a greeting as Tasha rolled down her window. His eyes quickly took in her appearance, a black woman, professionally dressed, visibly pregnant. "Good evening, officer," Tasha replied with practiced calm. "My license is in my purse on the passenger seat. Before I reach for it, I need to inform you that I'm an FBI agent and I'm carrying my service weapon." Reynolds stiffened, his hand moving instinctively closer to his holster. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice hardening. "Officer, I'm 6 months pregnant and I'd prefer to remain seated if that's all right," Tasha said, maintaining an even tone. "I'm happy to provide my credentials." "I said step out of the vehicle," Reynolds repeated louder this time. "Now." Tasha recognized the escalation in his voice. She'd been trained to diffuse tense situations, but she was suddenly on the wrong side of law enforcement authority. Carefully, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door. Standing on the quiet suburban street, one hand supporting her lower back, Tasha faced the officer. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past her into the car, scanning the interior. "You were driving suspiciously slow through the neighborhood." "I was observing the posted speed limit," Tasha countered politely. "I'm not familiar with this area and was following my navigation to avoid highway traffic." "What's your business in Oak Ridge Heights?" Reynolds demanded, ignoring her explanation. The question hung in the air between them. Tasha had heard this question before, not always spoken so directly, but implied in glances and hesitations when she entered spaces where people who looked like her weren't expected. "As I mentioned, I'm using this route to avoid traffic on my way home from work," she explained patiently. "I'm an FBI agent stationed at the downtown field office." Reynolds' expression remained skeptical. "I'll need to see some identification." "My ID and credentials are in my purse on the passenger seat," Tasha repeated. "May I retrieve them?" After a tense moment, Reynolds nodded. Slowly, Tasha turned carefully, mindful of her movements as she leaned into the car to reach her purse. She felt the officer's eyes on her back, watching her every motion with unwarranted suspicion. "I'm just opening my purse now," she narrated, knowing from both professional training and personal experience how crucial clear communication was in these situations. As she retrieved her FBI credentials and driver's license, a car drove past them, slowing momentarily. The driver, an older white woman, stared openly before continuing down the street. Tasha wondered if she was concerned about the traffic stop or simply curious about the unfamiliar faces on her street. "Here are my credentials," Tasha said, handing them to Reynolds, "and my driver's license." The officer examined her FBI identification with obvious skepticism. He turned it over in his hands, held it up to the light, and frowned. "This doesn't look right," he said finally. Tasha blinked in surprise. "I assure you, Officer Reynolds," she said, reading his nameplate, "those are legitimate FBI credentials. You can call the field office to verify my identity if necessary." Reynolds ignored her suggestion. "What's a pregnant woman doing working as an FBI agent anyway? Shouldn't you be on leave or something?" The question was unprofessional and irrelevant to the traffic stop, but Tasha maintained her composure. "My maternity leave begins in 3 weeks. Until then, I'm fully capable of performing my duties." A bead of sweat trickled down her back despite the cool autumn air. Standing on the roadside, Tasha was acutely aware of her vulnerability. Her training as an agent had taught her how to handle confrontation, but her experiences as a black woman had taught her the dangers of being perceived as aggressive or non-compliant. "And what brings you to this neighborhood specifically?" Reynolds pressed, still holding her credentials. "There are plenty of other routes you could have taken. As I explained, my navigation app suggested this route to avoid traffic," Tasha repeated, fighting to keep frustration from her voice. "I'm simply trying to get home after a long day at work." Reynolds looked pointedly at the houses around them. "These homes start at $1 million. You're telling me you were just passing through? Not looking for opportunities?" The implication was clear and offensive. "Officer Reynolds, I'm an FBI agent heading home from work. I have no interest in these properties except as a route to bypass traffic." Another vehicle drove past, this one slowing significantly. The driver, a middle-aged man, made no pretense of not watching the scene unfold. Tasha noticed him pull into a driveway a few houses down, then remain in his car, likely observing them through his rear-view mirror. Reynolds seemed to notice the attention too, but appeared undeterred. "Wait here," he instructed, taking her credentials back to his vehicle. Tasha remained standing on the roadside, one hand still supporting her aching back. The baby shifted position, pressing against her ribs, and she winced slightly. She checked her watch. Nearly 20 minutes had passed since she'd been pulled over. Through the gathering dusk, she could see Reynolds in his vehicle, presumably running her information through the system. Despite her credentials, despite her calm and professional demeanor, she was being treated with suspicion that had no basis except, she suspected, the color of her skin in this predominantly white neighborhood. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, likely Dion wondering where she was. Tasha considered answering but thought better of it. Reaching for a phone during a traffic stop, even to check a message, could be misinterpreted. After several more minutes, Reynolds returned, still holding her credentials with visible reluctance. Your FBI ID is registering in the system, he admitted, sounding almost disappointed. But I still have questions about your presence here. Tasha took a deep breath. Officer Reynolds, I've explained my situation multiple times. I'm an FBI agent using navigation to avoid traffic. I've cooperated fully with your request despite the fact that you haven't yet told me what traffic violation I allegedly committed. At this point, I'd like to know if I'm being detained, or if I'm free to go. The direct question, a tactic she'd used herself in interviews, seemed to catch Reynolds off guard. I'm conducting an investigation, he said defensively. An investigation into what specifically? Tasha pressed, her patience wearing thin. What exactly am I suspected of doing? Reynolds' jaw tightened. Turn around and place your hands on the vehicle. Excuse me? Tasha couldn't hide her shock. I said place your hands on the vehicle, Reynolds repeated, his hand moving to his belt. Officer Reynolds, I'm 6 months pregnant and a federal agent. I've given you no reason. Do it now, or you'll be charged with resisting. He interrupted, his voice rising. A wave of disbelief and anger washed over Tasha, but her training took over. Slowly, painfully aware of how this scene would appear to any passers-by, she turned and placed her hands on the roof of her car. This is completely unnecessary, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Spread your feet, Reynolds instructed, moving behind her. Tasha complied, fighting back the humiliation she felt as she stood in this vulnerable position on a public street. The baby kicked again, hard enough that Tasha gasped. Stand still, Reynolds warned, misinterpreting her reaction. My baby is kicking, Tasha explained. I'm not resisting. She felt his hands pat down her sides, pausing when he felt her service weapon. Weapon, he announced, as if confirming his suspicions. As I informed you at the beginning of this stop, I'm carrying my FBI-issued service weapon, Tasha said, struggling to keep her voice level. Reynolds unholstered her weapon. Remain in position. Through the darkening street, Tasha could now see lights on in several houses, faces peering through windows at the scene unfolding on their quiet street. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering her strength. This encounter had gone far beyond a routine traffic stop, and she knew she needed to regain control of the situation before it escalated further. Officer Reynolds, she said clearly, opening her eyes and staring straight ahead at her car. I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately. The words hung in the air between them, a direct challenge to his authority. For a moment, Tasha worried she had pushed too far, but she knew her rights, both as an FBI agent and as a citizen. What she didn't know was that someone was already recording the encounter from their doorway across the street, capturing evidence of what would soon become much more than a misunderstanding between two law enforcement officers. Officer Reynolds stood silent for a long moment, Tasha's service weapon still in his hand. Her request for a supervisor had clearly caught him off guard. That won't be necessary, he finally said, his tone suggesting he was trying to regain control of the situation. I disagree, Tasha replied firmly. I've cooperated fully with this stop, which has now gone on for nearly 30 minutes without explanation. I've identified myself as a federal agent, which you can verify. I'm asking to speak with your supervisor. Her back ached from maintaining the uncomfortable position against the car, and she could feel her child moving restlessly within her. Tasha fought to keep her breathing steady. She needed to remain calm, but she also needed to advocate for herself. You can turn around, Reynolds said reluctantly, stepping back. He still held her weapon, a power move that wasn't lost on Tasha. She straightened carefully, one hand moving to support her lower back. Thank you. Now I'd like my credentials and my weapon returned, and I'd like to speak with your supervisor. Reynolds hesitated, then spoke into the radio on his shoulder. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. Send Sergeant Wilson to my location. A crackling response came through. Unit 47, Sergeant Wilson is en route. ETA 5 minutes. The knowledge that help was on the way brought Tasha a small measure of relief, though she remained wary. The sun had nearly set now, and the streetlights had flickered on, casting the scene in harsh artificial light. May I retrieve my phone from my pocket? Tasha asked, careful to telegraph her intentions. My husband is expecting me home. Reynolds nodded stiffly. Keep your hands where I can see them. Tasha slowly removed her phone, noting 3 missed calls from Dion. Rather than calling him back, which might further complicate the situation, she sent a quick text. Delayed by traffic stop. I'm fine. We'll call soon. Across the street, more residents had emerged from their homes, watching the scene with undisguised interest. An older man stood on his front porch with arms crossed, while a woman next door appeared to be filming with her phone. Tasha was simultaneously grateful for the witnesses and embarrassed by the public spectacle. "Officer," she said, lowering her voice, "this situation is drawing unnecessary attention. I'm still waiting to hear what traffic violation prompted this stop." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "You were driving suspiciously slow and appeared to be casing houses." "I was driving below the speed limit in an unfamiliar neighborhood," Tasha corrected. "That's hardly suspicious behavior." Before Reynolds could respond, another police vehicle pulled up behind his SUV. A stocky officer with salt and pepper hair emerged. Sergeant Wilson, Tasha presumed. Unlike Reynolds, he wasn't wearing sunglasses, and his expression was one of professional curiosity rather than hostility. "What's the situation here, Reynolds?" Wilson asked as he approached. Reynolds straightened his posture. "Suspicious vehicle moving slowly through the neighborhood, sir. Driver claims to be FBI, but the ID looks questionable to me." Wilson turned to Tasha, taking in her professional attire and visible pregnancy. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Wilson. Can you explain what's happening from your perspective?" The contrast between Wilson's approach and Reynolds was striking. Where Reynolds had been accusatory and confrontational, Wilson's tone was neutral and his questions open-ended. "Sergeant, I'm Special Agent Tasha Williams with the FBI. I was taking this route home to avoid traffic on the highway when Officer Reynolds pulled me over. I immediately identified myself as a federal agent and informed him I was carrying my service weapon. Despite providing my credentials, I've been detained for over 30 minutes without being told what traffic law I supposedly violated." Wilson turned to Reynolds. "May I see the ID in question?" Reynolds handed over Tasha's credentials with obvious reluctance. Wilson examined them briefly, then looked up with a changed expression. These appeared to be legitimate FBI credentials. "Reynolds," his tone had shifted, now tinged with concern. "They didn't look right to me, Sergeant," Reynolds insisted, "and her behavior was suspicious." Wilson cut him off with a raised hand, then turned back to Tasha. "Agent Williams, I apologize for the inconvenience. May I ask what office you work out of?" "The downtown field office," Tasha replied. "Violent Crimes Task Force." Wilson nodded, recognition crossing his face. "The Hernandez trafficking case? That's yours, isn't it?" Tasha was surprised by his knowledge of her work. "Yes, it is." "It's been in the briefings," Wilson explained, handing her credentials back with noticeably more respect than Reynolds had shown. "Good work there." "Thank you," Tasha said, accepting her ID. "I'd appreciate the return of my service weapon as well." Wilson turned to Reynolds, who still held Tasha's gun. "Officer?" With visible reluctance, Reynolds handed the weapon to Tasha, who checked it before returning it to her holster. "Agent Williams, again I apologize for this misunderstanding," Wilson said. "You're free to go." "With respect, Sergeant, this wasn't a misunderstanding," Tasha said, her voice quiet but firm. "I was profiled while driving through this neighborhood and then treated with unwarranted suspicion, despite identifying myself as a federal agent. Officer Reynolds refused to accept my credentials and escalated the situation unnecessarily." Wilson's expression tightened slightly, though whether from discomfort with her assertion or recognition of its truth, Tasha couldn't tell. "I understand your concern," he said carefully. "I assure you we'll address this internally." "I'd like to file a formal complaint," Tasha continued. "Officer Reynolds' conduct was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. I'm 6 months pregnant and was forced to stand with my hands on my vehicle for an extended period without cause." Reynolds stepped forward, his face flushed. "You were driving suspiciously in a high-value neighborhood." "That's enough, Reynolds," Wilson cut in sharply. "Wait in your vehicle." For a moment it seemed Reynolds might argue, but after a tense pause he turned and walked back to his SUV. Once he was out of earshot, Wilson lowered his voice. "Agent Williams, I understand your frustration. If you want to file a complaint, that's your right, but you know how these things go." The implication was clear. Complaints against officers rarely led to meaningful consequences. Tasha had seen it from both sides of the badge. "I do know how these things go," she agreed. "That's precisely why I need to file one. This wasn't just about me, Sergeant. If Officer Reynolds treats a pregnant federal agent this way, how does he treat civilians without my credentials or training?" Wilson couldn't quite meet her eyes. "I'll get you the forms," While Wilson returned to his vehicle, Tasha noticed the small crowd of onlookers had grown. At least 3 people were openly recording now, and others were talking among themselves, occasionally pointing in her direction. One woman, perhaps in her 60s, broke away from the group and approached cautiously. "Excuse me," she called. "Are you all right?" "We've been watching from my house across the street." Tasha gave her a tired smile. "I'm fine, thank you. Just a misunderstanding that's being resolved." The woman frowned. "It didn't look like a misunderstanding to us. My husband is on the neighborhood council, and we've had concerns about that officer before." Before Tasha could respond, Wilson returned with a clipboard holding official complaint forms. "Here you are. Agent Williams," he said, handing them to her. He noticed the neighbor and nodded politely. "Evening, Mrs. Chen." "Sergeant Wilson," the woman acknowledged coolly. "I've recorded this entire incident. That young officer had this pregnant lady standing with her hands on the car for no good reason." Wilson's professional demeanor faltered slightly. "We're handling the situation, ma'am." "I certainly hope so," Mrs. Chen replied. "Because this isn't the first time we've seen him treating people differently, based on how they look." The comment hung in the air, a public acknowledgement of what Tasha had experienced. Other neighbors murmured in agreement. Wilson cleared his throat. "Agent Williams, you're free to go. You can return those forms to the station or mail them in." Tasha nodded, suddenly exhausted by the whole ordeal. "Thank you, Sergeant." As she moved to get back into her car, she felt a twinge in her abdomen, sharper than the baby's normal movements. The stress of the situation was taking its toll, and she needed to get home and rest. Mrs. Chen touched her arm gently. "Are you sure you're all right, dear? You look pale." "Just tired," Tasha assured her, though the discomfort was growing. "Thank you for your concern." As she settled back into her car, Tasha could see Reynolds watching her from his SUV, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Wilson was speaking to the small crowd of neighbors, likely trying to disperse them. Tasha started her engine, her hand trembling slightly. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. As a federal agent, she was accustomed to tense situations, but being on the receiving end of unwarranted suspicion and hostility, especially while pregnant, had affected her deeply. She pulled away from the curb, aware of the eyes still watching her. What had begun as a simple detour to avoid traffic had become something much more complicated. And as the pain in her abdomen sharpened again, Tasha wondered if the consequences of this encounter might extend beyond a formal complaint. Tasha gripped the steering wheel tightly as she pulled into her driveway. The cramping had intensified during her drive home, each twinge sending a wave of worry through her. She sat for a moment in the darkened car, trying to steady her breathing. The front door opened and Dion's silhouette appeared, backlit by the warm light from their home. He jogged toward the car, concern evident in his hurried movements. "Tash, what happened?" "You're over an hour late," he said as he opened her door. His expression changed immediately when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" "I need to get inside," she managed, wincing as another cramp gripped her abdomen. "Help me up." Dion's arm went around her waist, supporting her as she eased out of the car. "Talk to me. What's happening?" "I got pulled over in Oak Ridge Heights," Tasha explained as they slowly made their way to the front door. The officer. "It was bad, Dion, really bad." Inside, she sank onto their sofa, hands cradling her belly protectively. The baby shifted, a movement that would normally comfort her but now only heightened her anxiety. "I'm calling Dr. Rivera," Dion said, already reaching for his phone. "Wait," Tasha said. "Let me just rest for a minute." The cramping started right as I was leaving. "It might just be stress." Dion sat beside her, taking her hand. "Tell me everything." Tasha recounted the traffic stop, the officer's suspicion, the humiliation of being forced to stand with her hands on the car, and finally, Sergeant Wilson's intervention. As she spoke, she could see Dion's expression darkening with anger. "He made you stand like that? While pregnant?" His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. "Did you get his badge number?" "I got more than that," Tasha said. "The neighbors were filming, and I filed a complaint on the spot." She shifted position, wincing again. The cramping had eased slightly, but her back still ached. "That's it. I'm calling Dr. Rivera," Dion insisted, standing up. "And then I'm calling Thomas." Thomas Grant was Tasha's direct supervisor at the FBI and a family friend. As Dion made the calls, Tasha closed her eyes, replaying the incident in her mind. Despite years of law enforcement training, despite knowing her rights and having the authority of a federal badge, she had felt powerless on that street corner. The memory of Reynolds' dismissive attitude toward her credentials made her jaw clench. "Dr. Rivera wants us to go to the hospital," Dion announced, returning to the living room. "She says it's probably nothing serious, but with the stress and your blood pressure history, she wants you monitored." Tasha nodded, too tired to argue. "What did Thomas say?" "He's furious. Said he's calling the police chief directly. He also mentioned something about your car dash cam." "Right," Tasha said, straightening slightly. In her distress, she'd forgotten. "The Bureau installed dash cams in all our vehicles last year, after those agents were ambushed in Riverside. Mine activates automatically when the car stops." A small smile crossed Dion's face. "So there's video of the entire incident from your perspective?" "There should be," Tasha confirmed. "The footage uploads to our secure server automatically." "Good," Dion said firmly. "Now let's get you to the hospital." By midnight, Tasha was lying in a hospital bed, monitors beeping softly as they tracked her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat. Dr. Rivera had examined her and ordered precautionary monitoring, though she'd been reassuring about the baby's condition. "Your blood pressure is elevated, which isn't surprising given what you've been through," the doctor had explained. "The cramping appears to be Braxton Hicks contractions, exacerbated by stress and dehydration. We'll keep you overnight for observation, but I don't think you're in preterm labor." Dion dozed in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers even in sleep. Tasha's phone buzzed on the bedside table and she carefully reached for it, trying not to wake him. A text from Thomas. "Just got access to your dashcam footage. Chief Morris has seen it too. Call me when you can." As she was reading the message, another came through. This one from Lisa Alvarez, the deputy director. "Agent Williams, I've been briefed on today's incident. Take whatever time you need for your health and your baby. We've got your back." Tasha felt tears prick her eyes. The support meant more than she could express, especially after feeling so isolated and vulnerable just hours earlier. A soft knock on the door drew her attention. A nurse entered, checking the monitors and adjusting Tasha's IV. "How are you feeling?" the nurse asked quietly, mindful of Dion sleeping nearby. "Better," Tasha admitted. "The cramping has stopped." "Good," the nurse smiled. "Your little one's heartbeat is nice and strong." She hesitated, then added, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I saw what happened to you on social media." "My sister lives in Oak Ridge Heights." Tasha blinked in surprise. "It's on social media already?" The nurse nodded. "Mrs. Chen's video has thousands of shares. She posted it with a message about police accountability. People are pretty upset about how you were treated." After the nurse left, Tasha carefully opened her social media app, something she rarely checked due to her job's sensitivity. She searched Oak Ridge Heights police and was stunned by the results. Multiple videos appeared, taken from different angles, showing her standing with her hands on the car while visibly pregnant. One particularly clear video captured Reynolds' dismissive examination of her FBI credentials and Wilson's subsequent confirmation of their authenticity. The comments beneath the videos were a mix of outrage, personal stories of similar experiences, and debates about racial profiling. Tasha closed the app, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the public nature of what had been a deeply personal humiliation. Dion stirred, opening his eyes. "Everything okay?" "The incident is all over social media," Tasha said softly. "Mrs. Chen's video has gone viral." Dion sat up, instantly alert. "What does that mean for you?" "For the case you're working on?" It was a valid concern. As an FBI agent working on sensitive cases, public exposure could be problematic. The Hernandez trafficking investigation was particularly delicate, with potential witnesses who needed protection. "I don't know," Tasha admitted. "I need to talk to Thomas and the deputy director in the morning." By 9 a.m., Tasha's hospital room had become an impromptu meeting space. Thomas Grant sat in the visitor's chair, his weathered face grave as he reviewed notes on his tablet. Deputy Director Alvarez had called in, her voice coming clearly through the speakerphone on the bedside table. "The police chief has placed Officer Reynolds on administrative leave pending an internal investigation," Thomas informed them. "Your dashcam footage combined with the neighbor videos left him little choice. The Bureau's official position is full support for Agent Williams," Alvarez added. We've issued a statement confirming you were inappropriately detained while identifying yourself as a federal agent. Tasha shifted in the bed, adjusting the hospital gown. What about the Hernandez case? Could this affect our prosecution? We've considered that, Thomas said. The defense might try to use this incident to paint you as biased against law enforcement, but the evidence in the Hernandez case stands on its own. Your personal experience doesn't change the facts we've gathered. What about your safety, though? Dion interjected from his position by the window. If this keeps spreading online, everyone will know Tasha's face, including Hernandez's associates. It was a concern Tasha had been wrestling with all night. Her role typically involved staying out of the spotlight, working methodically behind the scenes to build cases that would stand up in court. We're addressing that. Alvarez's voice came through the speaker. We've assigned additional security to your residence, and we're expediting your maternity leave. I want you focusing on your health and your baby, Agent Williams. Let us handle the fallout from this incident. Thomas reached over to squeeze Tasha's hand, a rare gesture from the typically reserved supervisor. You did everything right, Tasha. You followed procedure, maintained your professionalism, and protected yourself and your child. What happened to you was wrong, and there will be consequences. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Rivera entered with a smile. Good news. Your blood pressure has stabilized, and all the monitoring shows the baby is doing fine. You can go home today, but I want you on modified bed rest for at least a week. As the doctor detailed restrictions and follow-up appointments, Tasha's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced down to see the headline. FBI agent racially profiled while pregnant. Police department under fire. The story was moving faster than any of them had anticipated. What had begun as a routine traffic stop had transformed into something much larger. A public conversation about bias, accountability, and the experiences of Black Americans in law enforcement, both as civilians and as officers themselves. As Tasha listened to Dr. Rivera's instructions, her hand resting protectively on her belly, she wondered what this would mean for her career, for her family, and for the wider community. The incident had been traumatic, but perhaps some good could come from exposing the reality that even a federal badge couldn't shield her from the biases that shaped too many encounters between police and people of color. What she couldn't know yet was just how far the ripples from this incident would spread, or how it would ultimately transform not just her life, but the policies and practices of two powerful law enforcement agencies. 3 months had passed since the incident in Oak Ridge Heights. The crisp autumn day when Tasha had been detained had given way to winter, and then to the first tentative signs of spring. Much had changed in those months, both in Tasha's life and in the two law enforcement agencies at the center of the controversy. Tasha sat in a rocking chair by the nursery window, her newborn daughter asleep against her chest. Nia Williams had arrived 2 weeks ago, healthy and determined, with a powerful set of lungs that suggested she might follow her mother into a profession where making herself heard was an asset. Dion entered the room quietly, a cup of tea in his hand. "How are my girls doing?" he whispered, placing the cup on the side table. "We're good," Tasha smiled, gently patting Nia's back. She just fell asleep. Through the window, Tasha could see a news van parked down the street, the third this week. The story of what had happened to her hadn't faded from public consciousness as quickly as such stories sometimes did. Instead, it had become a catalyst for uncomfortable but necessary conversations within police departments across the country. Her phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Meeting with Chief Morris went well. He wants to know if you're available to speak at next month's training session." Tasha had been hesitant when first approached about sharing her experience as part of the police department's reformed training program. The idea of standing in front of officers, including some who might share Reynolds's biases, had initially seemed daunting. But over time, she'd recognized the potential impact of her voice in that room. "What are you thinking about?" Dion asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "The training session with the police department," Tasha replied. "I think I'm going to do it," Dion nodded. "I think you should. They need to hear from you." The investigation into Officer Reynolds had been completed 6 weeks after the incident. The dashcam footage from Tasha's car, combined with the videos taken by Mrs. Chen and other neighbors, had provided irrefutable evidence of inappropriate conduct. Reynolds's personnel file, which became public during the investigation, revealed a pattern of complaints from minority residents that had never resulted in disciplinary action. Reynolds had been terminated from the force, a rare outcome in such cases. More significantly, the department had implemented a comprehensive review of traffic stop data, revealing racial disparities that could no longer be ignored or explained away. "Did you see the interview with Sergeant Wilson?" Dion asked, sitting on the ottoman near the rocking chair. Tasha nodded. He seemed different, more aware. Wilson had become an unexpected ally in the push for accountability. After initially trying to minimize the incident, he had been confronted with the statistical evidence of bias within his own department. His public acknowledgement that the system had failed both the community and officers like Tasha had earned him respect from reform advocates and criticism from those resistant to change. "The policy changes are going before the city council next week," Tasha said, referring to the package of reforms that had emerged from the controversy: body cameras for all officers, regular review of stop data, and a civilian oversight board with actual authority. "And it all started because you took a shortcut to avoid traffic," Dion mused, reaching out to stroke his daughter's tiny hand. Tasha smiled sadly. "It started long before that. It started with the first person who was profiled and wasn't believed. The first complaint that was filed and ignored. The first officer who saw something wrong and stayed silent. The baby stirred, making small sounds before settling back against her mother's chest." Tasha adjusted the soft blanket around her. "Deputy Director Alvarez called," she said after a moment. "They're finalizing the new protocol for interagency cooperation. It's going to be named after me. The Williams Protocol established clear guidelines for how local law enforcement should interact with federal agents, including verification procedures and accountability measures. It was one of several policy changes that had emerged from what had happened to Tasha. "How do you feel about that?" Dion asked. Tasha considered the question. "Proud, I think, and hopeful that it might prevent someone else from going through what I did." She paused, but also sad that it took something so public for these changes to happen. A soft knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Dion went to answer it while Tasha remained with the baby. He returned moments later. "It's Mrs. Chen. She brought a casserole and wants to see the baby." Since the incident, Mrs. Chen had become an unexpected part of their lives. The older woman who had first recorded the traffic stop had later testified at the departmental hearing and had kept in touch with Tasha throughout her pregnancy. "Send her in." Tasha smiled. Nia should meet the woman who helped make sure she wasn't born to a mother in handcuffs. Mrs. Chen entered the nursery with the careful movements of someone who had raised children of her own. She set the casserole on the dresser and approached the rocking chair with a warm smile. "There she is," she whispered, looking at the sleeping infant. "What a beautiful child. Would you like to hold her?" Tasha offered. As Mrs. Chen gently took the baby, Tasha was struck by how this woman, a stranger, 3 months ago had become connected to her family through one moment of moral clarity and courage. "I saw on the news that officer is trying to appeal his termination," Mrs. Chen said, gently rocking Nia. Tasha nodded. "His union is fighting it. They're arguing that he followed department procedure." "And did he?" Mrs. Chen asked, her directness one of the qualities Tasha had come to appreciate about her. "Technically, in some ways, yes," Tasha admitted. "That's part of the problem. The procedures themselves enabled the bias. That's why changing the policies is as important as holding individuals accountable." Mrs. Chen handed Nia back to Tasha. "I've lived in Oak Ridge Heights for 40 years. I've seen how certain people get treated when they drive through our neighborhood. It took someone with your credentials to make others see what some of us have been seeing all along." Later that evening, after Mrs. Chen had gone and Nia was settled in her crib, Tasha sat at her desk reviewing the speech she was preparing for the upcoming FBI Academy graduation. As a celebrated agent whose case had prompted substantive reforms, she had been asked to address the newest class of agents. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. Tasha almost let it go to voicemail, wary of the media attention that still occasionally found its way to her. But something made her answer. "Agent Williams, this is Officer Lucia Patel from the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department." Tasha tensed slightly. "Yes, Officer Patel. I'm sorry to bother you at home. the woman continued. I'm one of the officers who's been assigned to implement the new community engagement initiative that came out of what happened to you. I see, Tasha said, unsure where this conversation was heading. The thing is, Patel's voice grew quieter, more personal. I wanted to thank you. I've been on the force for 5 years and I've seen things that made me uncomfortable, but I never knew how to address them. Your case gave a lot of us the language and the courage to speak up. The call left Tasha thoughtful. From the beginning, she had been determined that what happened to her should matter beyond her individual experience. Hearing that it had empowered officers within the department to push for change from within was perhaps the most meaningful outcome she could have hoped for. As she finished reviewing her speech, Tasha added a new final paragraph. Change doesn't come from one incident or one person. It comes when we recognize that each of us has the power to speak up, to record what we witness, to believe those whose experiences differ from our own, and to hold systems accountable. My story is just one thread in a larger tapestry. What matters is what we choose to do with these moments of truth when they appear before us, whether we're wearing a badge, holding a phone, or simply standing witness to another's humanity. She saved the document and closed her laptop. Through the window, she could see the news van had finally left. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and perhaps new opportunities for change. But tonight, in the quiet of her home with her family safe around her, Tasha allowed herself to simply be, not an agent, not a symbol, but a mother holding the future in her arms and daring to believe it might be better than the past.